Now, on April the 21st, 2015, the world shattered for our next guest and her life was forever changed.
Marianne Kenny has written a book called The Episode that details what happened on that day and what happened in the aftermath, and joins us now. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us.
It's very nice to be here. Thanks.
It's lovely to have you. What happened to you on that day, the 21st of April 2015?
Well, it started out as a normal day like any other. I went off to work and my husband dropped the kids to school, and I came out of a work meeting and I noticed that I'd missed a number of calls, and I started to investigate who had been trying to contact me, and I found myself talking to a guard at the other end of John's phone when I rang his phone. And he told me that something had happened to John and that I needed to come to Dunleary Hospital and that I needed to bring somebody with me. And I asked him to tell me over the phone, well, what's happened to John? And he just repeated, he just said, you need to come to the hospital, you need to bring somebody with me. And I knew immediately that John had died because I had seen enough films, I'd read enough books to know if they don't tell you over the phone. And sure enough, John had passed away. He'd been out jogging and had died suddenly out of the blue.
Just 60 years, 50 years.
No, he was 60, so he was that bit older. But that was the only risk factor he had. And an autopsy afterwards showed he'd had cardiovascular disease, severe, but we knew nothing about that. It's sometimes called the silent killer, and it certainly was in his case.
A shock.
Yeah, just absolutely devastating for the three of us. Yeah.
And to have to explain this to your
Yeah,
kids.
so that was really the worst part of the whole thing, that later that afternoon I had to pick my kids up and tell them what had happened. And a bit like me earlier in the day, my son kept asking, well, where's Dad, where's Dad? And I kept saying, I'll tell you when we get home. And then he kept persisting, and he actually said to me, is he dead? Just incredible for a young 8-year-old. And I said he is. And that was it. That moment, that completely shattered our lives. And I felt I'm destroying any happiness that they ever had, to have to tell them that. I felt that myself, yeah.
For anyone who's watching right now who's lost a partner, it's a grief I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's acute, it's all-encompassing.
Yeah.
One would imagine. You've got children, so you have to go on.
Yeah.
There was a point when people said to you, this might be more than just grief. When was that?
Yeah, so we're talking maybe 3 months, 2.5, 3 months after the bereavement, which in retrospect is not a very long time,
No.
but I guess people were trying to be helpful. And it was suggested to me maybe an antidepressant would help. So I took an antidepressant and unfortunately had a very bad reaction to that antidepressant and suffered a severe physical reaction, burning, tingling throughout my body.
Your body?
Yeah, my arms, my legs, my torso. I can't say why that happened. Was it physical or psychosomatic or due to the anxiety? But it happened in a context where my resources were already so depleted after months of grieving and trying to comfort the children. And I think it just was the final straw for me and tipped me over the edge. Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, I suppose you could say I lost touch with reality. The situation I was in reality was very precarious because I was struggling in that context of this physical reaction as well. I was struggling to, I suppose, hold our lives together. I think I was just about holding it together. I don't think the children really picked up on it too much, but I began to think that I maybe found somebody might think I'm not fit to parent. And in that context, I began to mistrust people. And I was referred to psychiatric services and I began to attend a sort of a day hospital where I would go every day. And during that time, there was a particular evening where suddenly this conviction took hold of me that something had happened to the children, that the children had been damaged, that they had been harmed by my medication and that it was my fault. Yeah. So I had this fierce conviction of guilt that was delusional, but when you're in the grip of something like that, you don't think it's delusional, you think it's very real.
Yeah. It was your reality.
Yeah, it was my reality, and it was a terrifying reality.
You ended up having a 12-week stay in a psychiatric hospital, and then one day you got out because you wanted to see your children, and that led to another kind of cataclysmic series of events.
Yeah. So look, I left the hospital. It wasn't a wise thing to do, obviously. You know, I left without permission. I went home because I just wanted to check that the children were okay, because at that point, even the possibility that they might be taken into care had become a real possibility. It wasn't just in my mind. And I wanted to check that they were still at home. And I did check, and I was able to check that they hadn't, in fact, been taken. I came back into hospital, but obviously the professionals, the fact that I had left the hospital, it just raised all sorts of alarm bells. I was transferred into a locked ward. And I suppose that time then, the next few days, I would say were the absolute peak of the episode, or the lowest point, if you like. And during those few days, I was asked, there was intense, I suppose, assessments and questioning of me, of why I had left. Had I thoughts of harm? Had I been planning anything? Questions that I had actually been asked intensively, even over the last 2 months at that point. And in that state, I suppose, of, you know, severe dislocation from reality, I told the professionals what I thought they wanted to hear, which was, I said, yes, I do. You're right. I do have these thoughts of harm. I do have these intentions. And sadly for me, I mean, I didn't. I never had any intentions or plans to harm anybody, but the fact that I said it and I describe it in the book as a false confession, had very serious repercussions for me afterwards.
And I know you said at the time you almost felt euphoric because they would stop asking you these questions. Exactly. But then all of a sudden it dawned on you, oh my goodness, what have I just said here?
It did, because actually within a couple of days even, I would say, of that, I started to recover and I realised the seriousness.
Well, this is the incredible thing. So when you were in the hospital, you said that in terms of empathy, you weren't able to talk about what had happened to you, but you were medicated the whole way through it.
Yes.
You were there for a 12-week period, but you did start to get better and very, very quickly. And within a short space of time, you were able to go and see your children again.
Yeah, my children started to visit me again. I was still in hospital. So, and then eventually, before I was discharged, you know, I did have a couple of visits at home. But the problem for me was there was no talk therapy throughout the time I was in hospital. So there was nobody with whom I suppose I could develop a relationship of trust. So as I recovered, as I realised, A, that my delusion of guilt was just that, a delusion, and B, that I had created a terrible predicament for myself by my confessions of thoughts that I'd never had. There was nobody to help me. There was nobody that I could share any of that with. So I was left effectively on my own to deal with all of that and to figure it out for myself.
Which from the outside, like reading this book, everyone's like, well, you went into a psychiatric hospital to get better, but it was just medication. There are so many issues with how the treatment was, and it's eye-opening what you went through. You got out?
Yeah.
You got out. You got better so quickly when the right medication was given to you.
Presumably,
What would you say to anyone now who's going through grief and people are kind of going, now it's time to get on with it?
Yeah.
What would you say?
I think you have to be very gentle with yourself. I think you have to be very patient. You know, in retrospect, when I look back, I think I was impatient to get better. It wasn't a long time. It was, say, 3.5 months after the bereavement when I decided, maybe I will, maybe I am depressed, maybe I should try medication. I don't think in retrospect that I needed to go there. I think it was normal grief. I think it was brutal, very difficult. And I suppose I do regret that I didn't just sit with the grief and maybe, you know, be more patient. But it was very hard for me to imagine in that situation that I would get better.
It's just incredible.
You're doing well. The boys are good.
How are you? How are the boys?
You know, it's a very strange thing, but once I got out of that hospital, once I was able to liberate myself from what was really a very counter-therapeutic environment, I found the strength and the resilience within myself to recover. And that has actually given me enormous confidence and also joy, I have to say, to get my life back, because I was on the verge of losing so much more than just my husband. So it has actually made me stronger.
It's an incredible story, and we've just touched on it here now.
I know.
And it must have been incredible for you to just even put it out there and onto paper as well. Thank you so much. The book is called The Episode, A True Story of Loss, Madness and Healing. Mary Ann Kenny, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks very much.
If this is something that I suppose has touched you this morning, do check out the Virgin Media helplines. You'll see on screen now as well.